Maria Johnson sat in her corner office on the 32nd floor of the downtown Chicago building. She looked out at the busy city streets below and smiled. At 42 years old, she had built something most people only dream about. Her journey from a small apartment in the south side of Chicago to owning multiple successful businesses was nothing short of amazing. 20 years ago, Maria had been a young computer science graduate with big dreams and very little money. She started her first technology company in her tiny apartment with just $5,000 she had saved from working part-time jobs during college. Her mother had been a school teacher and her father worked at a factory. They taught her that hard work and honesty were the keys to success in life. Maria remembered those early days when she would work 18 hours a day writing computer code and calling potential customers. She ate simple meals and wore the same 3 business outfits over and over again. Many people told her that starting a tech company was too risky. Some said a young black woman would never succeed in the technology world. But Maria never listened to the doubters. She believed in herself and her vision. Her first company created software that helped small businesses manage their customer information better. It took 3 years before she made her first real profit. During those difficult early years, Maria faced many challenges. Some potential clients would not take meetings with her. Others would ask to speak with the real owner of the company when she introduced herself as the CEO. But Maria never gave up. She knew that her software was good and that persistence would pay off eventually. The breakthrough came when a large retail chain decided to use her software in all their stores across the country. That single contract changed everything for Maria. Within 2 years, her company was serving hundreds of businesses. She hired more employees and moved to a real office building. Maria made sure to hire people from different backgrounds because she remembered how it felt to be overlooked because of how she looked. 5 years ago, Maria made the biggest decision of her business career. A major technology corporation offered to buy her company for $50 million. It was more money than she had ever imagined having. After thinking carefully about the offer, she decided to sell. The sale made her one of the wealthiest women in Chicago. But Maria did not stop working. She used her money and experience to start investing in other businesses and helping young entrepreneurs achieve their dreams. Today, Maria owns shares in 12 different companies. She invested in restaurants, real estate, and other technology startups. Her favorite investments were companies started by young women and minorities who reminded her of herself 20 years ago. Maria also served on the boards of several major corporations and charitable organizations. One of her most important board positions was at First National Bank, where she had been a member for 3 years. First National Bank was not just any bank to Maria. It was the same bank where she had opened her first business account 20 years ago with just $50. The bank manager back then had been kind and encouraging. He told her that every successful business started with a dream and a first deposit. Maria had kept her personal and business accounts at First National Bank ever since. She trusted them completely and considered them partners in her success. Maria looked at her calendar and saw that she had a busy day ahead. She needed to attend a board meeting in the morning, have lunch with potential investors, and then prepare for a charity event that evening. Her company was sponsoring a back-to-school event for underprivileged children in Chicago. They planned to give away backpacks, school supplies, and scholarships to help kids get a better education. For the charity event, Maria needed to withdraw $20,000 in cash. The money would be used to buy additional supplies and provide emergency assistance to families who needed extra help. She had called First National Bank the day before to let them know about the large cash withdrawal. The customer service representative had assured her that everything would be ready and that the process would be quick and simple. Maria gathered her purse and car keys. She felt good about the day ahead and looked forward to helping the children at the charity event. She had no idea that her simple trip to the bank would turn into one of the most shocking experiences of her life. As she walked toward the elevator, Maria thought about how far she had come and how grateful she was for all the opportunities life had given her. She believed that treating everyone with respect and kindness was the most important thing a person could do. Maria Johnson parked her silver Mercedes in front of First National Bank at exactly 10:30 in the morning. The sun was shining brightly, and the downtown Chicago streets were filled with business people hurrying to their meetings. Maria checked her appearance in the car mirror one last time. She was wearing her favorite navy blue business suit with a white silk blouse and pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. She looked professional and confident, ready for what she thought would be a quick and easy banking transaction. As Maria walked toward the bank entrance, she noticed the familiar sight of the tall glass building that housed the downtown branch of First National Bank. This was the same branch where she had first opened her business account 20 years ago. She remembered feeling nervous and excited that day, clutching her first $50 deposit and dreaming about the future. Now she was returning as a successful businesswoman and board member of the very same bank. The heavy glass doors opened automatically as Maria approached. The cool air conditioning felt refreshing after the warm summer morning outside. The bank lobby was spacious and modern, with marble floors and comfortable seating areas. Several customers were waiting in line for the tellers, while others sat at desks speaking with customer service representatives. Maria noticed that the bank was busier than usual for a Tuesday morning. Maria smiled and nodded at James, the security guard who had worked at the bank for over 15 years. James had always been friendly and professional during her previous visits. He recognized her immediately and gave her a warm smile in return. Maria felt comfortable and welcome as she made her way across the lobby toward the customer service area. She approached the reception desk where a young woman was organizing paperwork. The receptionist looked up and asked how she could help. Maria explained that she needed to make a large cash withdrawal and had called ahead yesterday to arrange everything. The receptionist checked her computer and confirmed that there was a note about the withdrawal request. She directed Maria to sit in the waiting area and said that a manager would be with her shortly. Maria sat down in one of the comfortable leather chairs and looked around the familiar bank lobby. She noticed several employees working behind the counter and recognized a few faces from her previous visits. The bank had been completely renovated 2 years ago and now looked very modern and professional. Digital screens displayed current interest rates and investment options. Maria felt proud to be associated with such a well-run financial institution. While waiting, Maria thought about the charity event that would take place that evening. Her company had organized a back-to-school celebration for 300 children from low-income families in Chicago. Each child would receive a backpack filled with school supplies, notebooks, pencils, and other items they needed for the new school year. The $20,000 she was withdrawing would be used to buy additional supplies and provide emergency assistance to families who needed help with school uniforms or other expenses. Maria had started this annual charity event 5 years ago after remembering her own childhood struggles. Her parents had worked hard to provide for her and her 2 younger brothers, but back-to-school shopping was always a financial challenge for their family. She remembered wearing hand-me-down clothes and using old notebooks with pages torn out. Now that she had the means to help other children, Maria felt it was her responsibility to give back to the community that had supported her journey to success. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Maria saw a tall man in a gray suit walking toward her. He appeared to be in his early 50s with thinning brown hair and a serious expression on his face. The man introduced himself as Robert Stevens, the branch manager. Maria had never met him before, which was unusual since she had been banking at this location for so many years and knew most of the staff members. Robert asked Maria to follow him to his office, which was located behind the main customer service area. His office was smaller than Maria had expected for a branch manager, with a simple desk, 2 chairs, and a few banking awards hanging on the walls. Robert gestured for Maria to sit down while he took his place behind the desk. Maria noticed that his demeanor seemed much more formal and cold compared to the friendly reception she usually received at the bank. Maria explained that she needed to withdraw $20,000 in cash for a charity event and mentioned that she had called ahead to arrange the transaction. She handed Robert her driver's license and bank card, expecting the process to move quickly since everything had been prepared in advance. However, Robert's reaction was not what Maria had expected at all. Robert Stevens picked up Maria's driver's license and examined it closely under his desk lamp. He held it up to the light and looked at it from different angles, as if he suspected it might be fake. Maria watched with growing confusion as Robert spent nearly 5 minutes studying her identification. She had never experienced such thorough scrutiny during a simple banking transaction before. Other bank employees had always processed her requests quickly and professionally without any hesitation or suspicion. After examining her license, Robert turned to his computer and began typing slowly. He asked Maria several personal questions about her account history, her address, and her employment status. Maria answered each question patiently, though she was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the unnecessary interrogation. She had been a customer at this bank for 20 years and had never been questioned so extensively about her identity or her right to access her own money. Robert continued typing and clicking through various screens on his computer. He asked Maria to provide additional identification, so she showed him her credit cards and business cards. Robert examined each item carefully and wrote down information in a notebook. Maria noticed that his behavior was becoming increasingly suspicious and unfriendly. She wondered if there was some kind of problem with her account that she was not aware of. Finally, after nearly 15 minutes of questions and document examination, Robert leaned back in his chair and delivered the shocking news. He told Maria that he could not process her withdrawal request because the transaction seemed unusual and suspicious. Maria felt her heart skip a beat as she tried to understand what Robert was saying. She asked him to explain what was suspicious about a customer withdrawing money from her own account with proper identification and advance notice. Robert's response was even more shocking than his initial denial. He looked directly at Maria and said that $20,000 was a very large amount of money for someone like her to be withdrawing. Maria felt a chill run down her spine as she heard those words. She asked Robert what he meant by someone like her, but he simply repeated that the transaction did not seem appropriate given her profile as a customer. Maria remained calm and professional despite feeling angry and humiliated. She explained to Robert that she was a long-time customer with an excellent banking history and sufficient funds in her account to cover the withdrawal. She mentioned that she had called ahead to arrange the transaction and that the money was needed for a legitimate charity event. Robert dismissed her explanations and insisted that his decision was final. The situation became even more embarrassing as other customers in the bank began to notice the commotion. Maria could see people looking in their direction and whispering to each other. She felt humiliated to be treated like a criminal in front of other bank customers. Maria had built her reputation on professionalism and integrity, and this public questioning of her character was deeply painful. Maria asked to speak with someone in higher authority, perhaps the regional manager or another supervisor who could review Robert's decision. She explained that as a board member of the bank, she should not be subjected to this kind of treatment. However, Robert claimed that he was the highest authority present at the branch and that his decision could not be overruled by anyone else. Robert became increasingly rude and dismissive as the conversation continued. He suggested that if Maria was not satisfied with the bank's security procedures, she should consider taking her business elsewhere. Maria could hardly believe what she was hearing. This was the same bank where she had been a loyal customer for 2 decades, and now she was being told to leave because she wanted to withdraw her own money. Maria realized that something was seriously wrong with this situation. Robert's behavior was not normal banking procedure, and his comments about someone like her made it clear that his decision was based on prejudice rather than legitimate security concerns. She knew she had to take action to address this unacceptable treatment, not just for herself, but for other customers who might face similar discrimination. Maria stood up from her chair and told Robert that she would be filing a complaint about his conduct. She gathered her identification documents and walked out of his office with as much dignity as she could maintain. Other customers and bank employees watched as she made her way across the lobby, and Maria could feel their eyes following her every step. As Maria reached the bank lobby, she knew that this incident was far from over. She had the power and resources to fight back against this discrimination, and she was determined to make sure that Robert Stevens faced consequences for his unprofessional and prejudiced behavior. Maria stood in the bank lobby feeling shocked and angry about what had just happened in Robert Stevens' office. She took a deep breath and tried to process the situation calmly. As a successful businesswoman, she had faced challenges and obstacles throughout her career. But this level of disrespect and discrimination was something she had not experienced in many years. She knew that Robert's behavior was wrong, but she wanted to be absolutely certain about what she had witnessed before taking any action. Maria decided to observe what happened next at the bank. She pretended to be filling out a deposit slip at one of the counter stations while keeping an eye on Robert's office. Within minutes, she saw Robert emerge from his office and approach the next customer, who was waiting in the customer service area. The customer was a middle-aged white man in an expensive business suit carrying a leather briefcase. Maria watched carefully as Robert greeted the man with a warm smile and friendly handshake. The man explained that he needed to withdraw $30,000 in cash for a business transaction. Maria could hardly believe what she saw next. Robert immediately began processing the withdrawal without asking for additional identification or questioning the legitimacy of the transaction. The entire process took less than 5 minutes from start to finish. The contrast between how Robert treated Maria and how he treated the white businessman was shocking and undeniable. The white customer was withdrawing an even larger amount of money than Maria had requested, yet Robert did not ask him a single suspicious question. He did not examine the man's identification under a lamp or suggest that the transaction was unusual or inappropriate. Instead, Robert was professional, efficient, and respectful throughout the entire process. Maria realized that she had just witnessed clear evidence of racial discrimination. Robert's decision to deny her withdrawal had nothing to do with banking security procedures or legitimate concerns about the transaction. His behavior was based purely on racial prejudice and stereotypes about what kind of person should be allowed to withdraw large amounts of money from a bank account. As Maria continued to watch, she saw Robert help 2 more customers with various banking transactions. Both customers were white, and both received prompt, courteous service without any unnecessary questions or delays. One customer was a young woman who was depositing a large check, and another was an elderly man who was transferring money between accounts. Robert treated both customers with respect and professionalism. Maria felt her anger growing as she witnessed this pattern of differential treatment. She thought about all the times she had visited this bank over the past 20 years and wondered if other employees had treated her differently because of her race. She also thought about other minority customers who might have experienced similar discrimination but did not have the resources or influence to fight back against such treatment. The most painful part of this experience for Maria was the realization that her success and achievements meant nothing to Robert Stevens. Despite being a board member of the bank, a successful businesswoman, and a longtime customer with an excellent banking history, she was still being judged and mistreated because of the color of her skin. All of her hard work and accomplishments were invisible to Robert, who saw only her race and made assumptions based on his prejudices. Maria also thought about the impact this discrimination could have on other customers. She imagined young entrepreneurs who might be discouraged from pursuing their business dreams if they were treated with suspicion and disrespect when trying to access banking services. She thought about families who might be embarrassed and humiliated while trying to conduct legitimate financial transactions. The ripple effects of discrimination could be devastating for individuals and communities. As Maria stood in the bank lobby, she felt a sense of responsibility to take action. She knew that remaining silent about this incident would allow Robert to continue discriminating against other customers. She also knew that her position as a board member gave her unique power and influence to create change within the organization. This was not just about her personal experience, but about protecting other customers from similar treatment. Maria pulled out her phone and began to formulate a plan. She knew that she needed to document what had happened and report Robert's behavior to the appropriate authorities within the bank. She also knew that she needed to handle the situation professionally and strategically to ensure that real change would occur and that Robert would face appropriate consequences for his actions. The irony of the situation was not lost on Maria. She was standing in the lobby of a bank where she served on the board of directors, being denied access to her own money by an employee who worked for an organization that she helped to govern. This was her bank, and yet she was being treated like an unwelcome stranger who did not belong there. Maria looked around the familiar bank lobby one more time and made a decision. She was going to fight back against this discrimination with every resource and connection she had available. Robert Stevens had made a serious mistake by underestimating her, and he was about to learn exactly who he had chosen to discriminate against. Maria walked outside the bank and found a quiet spot on the sidewalk where she could make some important phone calls. Her hands were shaking slightly from anger and adrenaline, but she forced herself to remain calm and focused. She knew that handling this situation properly would require strategic thinking and careful communication. Maria had not built her successful career by acting impulsively when faced with challenges, and this situation would be no different. The first call Maria made was to her assistant, Jennifer, who had been working with her for over 8 years. Jennifer was shocked when Maria explained what had happened at the bank. She had known Maria long enough to understand that her boss was not someone who would exaggerate or make false accusations about discrimination. Jennifer immediately offered to help document the incident and contact the bank's corporate headquarters on Maria's behalf. Maria thanked Jennifer for her support, but explained that she wanted to handle the initial contact with the bank's leadership personally. As a board member, she had direct access to the senior executives and wanted to use that access to ensure that the situation was taken seriously. Maria asked Jennifer to cancel her lunch meeting so that she could focus entirely on addressing this discrimination incident. The second call Maria made was to her lawyer, David Chin, who had represented her in various business matters over the years. David had also become a close friend and trusted advisor. When Maria described what had happened at the bank, David was outraged and immediately offered to take legal action against the bank and Robert Stevens personally. He explained that Maria had a strong case for discrimination and that the bank could face serious consequences for allowing such behavior to occur. Maria appreciated David's willingness to fight for her, but she told him that she wanted to give the bank's leadership an opportunity to address the situation internally before considering legal action. She believed that the bank's executives would be horrified to learn about Robert's behavior and would take immediate steps to correct the problem. Maria asked David to stand by in case legal action became necessary, but she hoped that it would not come to that point. The most important call Maria made was to Thomas Wright, the chief executive officer of First National Bank. Maria had worked with Thomas on various board matters and had always found him to be a fair and ethical leader. She knew that Thomas would be shocked and disappointed to learn about the discrimination that had occurred at one of his bank branches. Maria also knew that Thomas had the authority to take immediate action to address the situation. When Thomas answered his phone, Maria could hear the surprise in his voice. He was not expecting a call from a board member in the middle of a Tuesday morning. Maria explained the situation calmly and professionally, providing specific details about Robert's behavior and the differential treatment she had witnessed. She described how Robert had denied her withdrawal, while immediately approving an even larger withdrawal for a white customer. Thomas was stunned by what he was hearing. He had known Maria for 3 years and had tremendous respect for her integrity and professionalism. He knew that she would never make false accusations or exaggerate a situation for personal gain. Thomas immediately apologized for the treatment Maria had received and assured her that the bank would investigate the incident thoroughly and take appropriate action. Maria explained to Thomas that her concern was not just about her personal experience, but about the potential impact on other customers who might face similar discrimination. She described how embarrassing and humiliating it had been to be questioned like a criminal in front of other bank customers. Maria also expressed her concern that Robert's behavior might be part of a pattern of discrimination that had affected other minority customers over time. Thomas assured Maria that discrimination of any kind was completely unacceptable and against all of the bank's policies and values. He explained that the bank had strict procedures for handling discrimination complaints and that he would personally oversee the investigation into Robert's conduct. Thomas also promised that immediate steps would be taken to prevent any similar incidents from occurring in the future. During their conversation, Thomas asked Maria if she would be willing to provide a written statement about the incident and cooperate with the bank's internal investigation. Maria agreed to provide whatever assistance was needed to ensure that the matter was handled properly. She also asked Thomas to review Robert's employment history to determine if there had been any previous complaints about discriminatory behavior. Thomas promised to look into Robert's background immediately and to take appropriate disciplinary action based on the findings. He also assured Maria that she would receive a full apology from the bank and that steps would be taken to ensure that all employees received additional training on customer service and anti-discrimination policies. As Maria ended her call with Thomas, she felt confident that the bank's leadership would take the situation seriously and address it appropriately. However, she also knew that she needed to follow up to ensure that real change occurred and that Robert faced meaningful consequences for his discriminatory behavior. Maria had learned from her business experience that promises were only valuable if they were backed up by concrete actions and results. Maria looked back at the bank building and realized that she still needed to complete her original transaction. The charity event was scheduled for that evening, and she still needed the $20,000 in cash to help the children and families who were counting on her support. Maria decided to return to the bank to see if the situation had changed now that the CEO was aware of what had happened. While Maria was standing outside the bank, Thomas Wright was already taking action from his corporate office downtown. As soon as he finished talking with Maria, Thomas called his human resources director, Sarah Martins, and his chief operating officer, Michael Davis, to an emergency meeting. Thomas had been CEO of First National Bank for 7 years and had never received such a serious discrimination complaint from a board member or any customer. Thomas explained the situation to his leadership team and asked them to begin an immediate investigation into Robert Stevens' conduct and employment history. Sarah Martinez accessed Robert's personnel file and discovered some troubling information. Robert had been the subject of 3 previous customer complaints over the past 2 years, all involving allegations of rude and discriminatory behavior toward minority customers. However, none of those complaints had been thoroughly investigated or properly documented. Michael Davis reviewed the security footage from the bank branch to verify Maria's account of what had happened. The video clearly showed Robert spending an excessive amount of time examining Maria's identification and questioning her extensively. The same footage showed Robert processing the white businessman's larger withdrawal quickly and efficiently without any additional security measures or questions. Sarah Martinez also discovered that Robert had received poor performance reviews from his previous supervisors, who noted that he had difficulty working with diverse customers and staff members. Despite these warning signs, Robert had been promoted to branch manager 18 months ago because of his technical banking knowledge and his ability to meet sales targets. The previous management team had overlooked his interpersonal problems and discriminatory attitudes. Thomas was angry and disappointed to learn that the bank had failed to address Robert's problematic behavior in the past. He realized that the organization had been negligent in allowing someone with a history of discrimination complaints to be promoted to a management position. Thomas knew that this failure had created liability for the bank and had allowed other customers to be mistreated over time. While the corporate investigation was beginning, Thomas decided to call Maria back to provide her with an update and to gather additional information. When Maria answered her phone, Thomas explained what his team had discovered about Robert's employment history and the previous complaints against him. Maria was not surprised to learn that other customers had experienced similar treatment from Robert. Thomas asked Maria if she would be willing to meet with the bank's investigators to provide a detailed statement about her experience. He also asked if she had witnessed Robert treating other customers differently during her visit to the bank. Maria agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation and described how she had observed Robert providing respectful service to white customers while denying her legitimate request. During their conversation, Thomas also apologized personally for the bank's failure to address Robert's discriminatory behavior sooner. He acknowledged that the organization had a responsibility to protect all customers from discrimination, and that they had failed to meet that responsibility. Thomas promised that significant changes would be made to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Maria appreciated Thomas's honesty and commitment to addressing the problem, but she also emphasized that the bank needed to take concrete actions rather than just making promises. She suggested that the bank should review all of Robert's previous customer interactions to identify other potential victims of discrimination. Maria also recommended that the bank implement better training and oversight procedures to prevent discriminatory behavior by other employees. Thomas agreed with Maria's suggestions and promised to implement comprehensive reforms to the bank's customer service and employee management policies. He also assured Maria that Robert would face immediate disciplinary action and that his future employment with the bank would depend on the results of the investigation. Thomas knew that the bank's reputation and legal liability were at stake, and he was determined to handle the situation properly. While Thomas and Maria were discussing the investigation, Sarah Martinez was conducting phone interviews with the 3 customers who had previously complained about Robert's behavior. All 3 customers were minorities who described similar experiences of being questioned excessively, treated with suspicion, and made to feel unwelcome at the bank. One customer had closed his account and moved to another bank because of Robert's treatment. Michael Davis was also reviewing customer service data from Robert's branch and discovered that minority customers had much higher complaint rates and lower satisfaction scores compared to other branches. This data provided statistical evidence that Robert's discriminatory behavior had been affecting customer service quality and customer retention at his location. The evidence was mounting against Robert Stevens, and it was becoming clear that his discrimination against Maria was part of a broader pattern of misconduct that had been allowed to continue for too long. Thomas realized that the bank had legal and ethical obligations to address this situation quickly and thoroughly to protect customers and prevent future discrimination. As the investigation continued, Thomas made the decision to suspend Robert Stevens immediately pending the completion of the internal review. He also decided to assign a senior manager to oversee the branch temporarily to ensure that customer service standards were maintained while the situation was being resolved. Thomas called Maria one more time that afternoon to inform her about Robert's suspension and to assure her that the investigation was proceeding quickly. He also told Maria that he wanted to meet with her personally to discuss the bank's response to the incident and to hear her recommendations for preventing similar problems in the future. Maria agreed to meet with Thomas the following day to continue their discussion about reforming the bank's policies and procedures. Maria decided to return to the bank to complete her withdrawal and to witness firsthand how the situation would be handled now that the CEO was involved. As she walked back through the glass doors, she noticed that several employees were whispering to each other and looking nervous. Word had clearly spread throughout the branch that something serious was happening involving the management and a customer complaint. Maria approached the customer service desk and asked to speak with Robert Stevens again. The receptionist looked uncomfortable and explained that Mr. Stevens was currently in a meeting with corporate headquarters. Maria said she would wait and took a seat in the lobby area where she could observe the ongoing activities in the bank. Other customers continued their banking business, unaware of the drama that was unfolding behind the scenes. Within 10 minutes, Maria saw Robert emerge from his office looking pale and shaken. He was carrying his cell phone and appeared to be receiving instructions from someone on the other end. Maria watched as Robert glanced around the lobby nervously, clearly aware that she was still present in the bank. His confident and dismissive attitude from earlier had completely disappeared. Robert walked over to where Maria was sitting and asked if he could speak with her privately. His tone was much more respectful than it had been during their earlier interaction, and Maria could see that he was trying to control his anxiety. Maria agreed to speak with him, but insisted that their conversation take place in the open lobby area rather than in his private office. As they sat down at one of the customer tables in the lobby, Robert began to apologize for the inconvenience and delay with Maria's withdrawal request. He explained that there had been a misunderstanding about the bank's security procedures and that he was now ready to process her transaction immediately. Robert's apology was clearly scripted and insincere, and Maria could tell that he was only trying to minimize the consequences of his discriminatory behavior. Maria looked directly at Robert and asked him to explain exactly what had changed about her transaction since their meeting 1 hour earlier. She pointed out that her identification, her account status, and her withdrawal request were all exactly the same as they had been when he had denied her service. Maria wanted Robert to acknowledge that his initial decision had been based on discrimination rather than legitimate security concerns. Robert became increasingly uncomfortable as Maria pressed him for specific answers about his change in behavior. He tried to deflect her questions by talking about general banking policies and security procedures, but Maria would not let him avoid taking responsibility for his actions. She reminded Robert that she had witnessed him providing immediate service to other customers while subjecting her to excessive questioning and suspicion. The conversation was interrupted when Maria's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and saw that it was Thomas Wright calling her back. Maria answered the phone and was surprised when Thomas asked her to put the call on speaker so that Robert could hear their conversation directly. Maria complied with Thomas's request, and suddenly Robert was listening to his own CEO speaking to the customer he had discriminated against. Thomas Wright's voice filled the lobby area as he addressed Robert directly through the speakerphone. Thomas explained that he had completed his initial review of the incident and had found Robert's behavior to be completely unacceptable and in violation of the bank's policies and values. He told Robert that discrimination against customers based on race or any other characteristic would never be tolerated at First National Bank. Robert's face turned bright red as he realized that his CEO was publicly reprimanding him in front of the customer he had mistreated and other bank employees who were listening nearby. Thomas continued by explaining that he had reviewed Robert's employment history and had discovered a pattern of similar complaints from other minority customers over the past 2 years. Thomas then delivered the news that would change Robert's life forever. He informed Robert that his employment with First National Bank was terminated immediately due to his discriminatory conduct and his violation of the bank's customer service standards. Thomas explained that Robert's behavior had created legal liability for the bank and had damaged the organization's reputation and values. The bank lobby fell completely silent as customers and employees absorbed what they were hearing. Robert sat frozen in his chair, unable to speak or move as the reality of his termination sank in. Maria felt no satisfaction in witnessing Robert's public humiliation, but she knew that this decisive action was necessary to send a clear message that discrimination would have serious consequences. Thomas instructed Robert to gather his personal belongings immediately and to leave the bank premises under the supervision of the security guard. He also informed Robert that he would receive additional information about his termination and final paycheck through the Human Resources Department. Thomas made it clear that Robert's dismissal was final and that there would be no opportunity for appeal or reconsideration. As Robert stood up from the table, several bank employees approached Maria to apologize for what had happened and to express their support for the CEO's decision. These employees explained that they had witnessed Robert's discriminatory behavior toward other customers in the past, but had been afraid to report it because he was their supervisor. They thanked Maria for having the courage to speak up and for forcing the bank to address the problem. Maria was saddened to learn that other employees had been aware of Robert's discrimination, but had felt powerless to stop it. She realized that the bank's organizational culture and reporting procedures had failed to protect customers and had allowed Robert's misconduct to continue unchecked. Maria made a mental note to discuss these systemic problems with Thomas during their upcoming meeting. As Robert gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the bank for the final time, Maria felt a mixture of emotions. She was relieved that justice had been served and that Robert would no longer be able to discriminate against other customers. However, she also felt sad that the situation had escalated to the point where someone lost their job, even though she knew that Robert's termination was the appropriate consequence for his actions. After Thomas Wright finished the phone call, the entire bank remained eerily quiet for several moments. Bank employees and customers who had witnessed the conversation stood in stunned silence, processing what they had just heard. Robert Stevens sat motionless at the table, staring down at his hands as the reality of his termination began to sink in. His career at First National Bank, which had spanned over 8 years, was ending in the most humiliating way possible. James, the security guard who had greeted Maria warmly when she first entered the bank, approached Robert's table with a respectful but firm demeanor. James had worked at the bank long enough to witness many difficult situations, but he had never seen a manager terminated so publicly and decisively. He gently told Robert that he needed to gather his personal belongings from his office and leave the premises immediately. Robert stood up slowly, his legs shaking from the shock and embarrassment of what had just happened. He avoided making eye contact with Maria or any of the other people in the lobby as he walked toward his office to collect his personal items. Several bank employees watched him with a mixture of sympathy and relief. They felt sorry that anyone had to lose their job, but they were also glad that Robert's discriminatory behavior would finally come to an end. Maria remained seated at the customer table, feeling emotionally drained from the intensity of the situation. She had never intended for her simple banking visit to result in someone losing their job, but she knew that Robert's termination was the natural consequence of his own choices and actions. Maria understood that discrimination was not just a personal attack against her, but a violation of basic human dignity that affected entire communities. While Robert was clearing out his office, several bank employees approached Maria to express their feelings about what had happened. Susan, a teller who had worked at the branch for 12 years, thanked Maria for speaking up about Robert's behavior. Susan explained that she had witnessed Robert treating minority customers differently on multiple occasions, but had been afraid to report it because she worried about retaliation from her supervisor. Another employee, Carlos, who worked in customer service, shared similar concerns about Robert's management style and discriminatory attitudes. Carlos was a young Hispanic man who had experienced subtle forms of discrimination from Robert during his 2 years at the bank. He told Maria that Robert had often made inappropriate comments about customers and employees from minority backgrounds, but that these comments had been dismissed as jokes or casual conversation. Maria listened carefully to these employees and realized that Robert's discrimination had created a toxic work environment that affected both customers and staff members. She understood that the bank's leadership needed to address not just Robert's individual misconduct, but also the organizational culture that had allowed such behavior to persist for so long. Maria made a mental note to discuss these broader issues with Thomas Wright during their planned meeting. As the employees shared their experiences, Maria also learned about other customers who had been mistreated by Robert over the years. Teresa, another teller, described an elderly African-American woman who had been made to wait for over an hour while Robert questioned her about a routine deposit. The woman had eventually left the bank in tears, feeling humiliated and disrespected by the treatment she had received. Maria was disturbed to hear these stories and realized that her experience was part of a much larger pattern of discrimination that had affected numerous people over time. She felt angry that other customers had been subjected to the same humiliation she had experienced, and she was determined to ensure that the bank implemented meaningful changes to prevent future incidents. Within 30 minutes, Robert emerged from his office carrying a small cardboard box containing his personal belongings. His face was red with embarrassment, and he kept his eyes focused on the floor as he walked through the lobby toward the exit. The other bank employees stopped their conversations and watched silently as their former manager left the building for the final time. As Robert reached the bank entrance, he paused for a moment and looked back at Maria. She could see a mixture of anger, shame, and regret in his expression. Robert seemed like he wanted to say something, But instead he just shook his head and continued walking out the door. Maria felt a brief moment of pity for Robert, knowing that his career and reputation had been permanently damaged by his own discriminatory choices. After Robert left the building, the atmosphere in the bank began to change. Employees seemed more relaxed and began speaking more openly about their experiences working under Robert's management. Several employees thanked Maria for her courage in confronting discrimination and for forcing the bank to take action against misconduct that had been ignored for too long. Maria finally felt ready to complete her original banking transaction. Sandra, the assistant manager who had worked at the branch for over 15 years, personally handled Maria's withdrawal request. Sandra apologized profusely for the treatment Maria had received and processed the $20,000 withdrawal quickly and professionally. She made sure that Maria received excellent customer service to help repair the damage that had been done to her banking experience. As Maria prepared to leave the bank with her cash for the charity event, several employees approached her one final time to express their gratitude and support. They told her that Robert's termination had sent a powerful message throughout the organization that discrimination would not be tolerated, and they hoped that the bank would implement better policies and training to prevent similar incidents in the future. Maria left the bank feeling emotionally exhausted but satisfied that justice had been served. She knew that Robert's termination was just the beginning of the changes that needed to be made at First National Bank. Over the coming weeks and months, she would work with the bank's leadership to implement comprehensive reforms that would create a more inclusive and respectful environment for all customers and employees. 3 months after the incident at First National Bank, Maria Johnson sat in the conference room of the bank's corporate headquarters, reviewing the comprehensive reforms that had been implemented following Robert Stevens' termination. The changes were far more extensive than she had originally expected, and she was pleased to see that the bank's leadership had taken the discrimination incident seriously enough to transform their entire approach to customer service and employee management. Thomas Wright had kept his promise to implement meaningful changes throughout the organization. The bank had hired a new chief diversity officer, Dr. Angela Rodriguez, who brought 15 years of experience in organizational change and anti-discrimination training. Dr. Rodriguez had conducted a thorough review of all bank policies and procedures to identify potential areas where discrimination could occur and had recommended specific changes to prevent future incidents. One of the most significant changes was the implementation of mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all bank employees, from entry-level tellers to senior executives. The training program included real-world scenarios based on actual discrimination incidents, including Maria's experience with Robert Stevens. Employees learned how to recognize discriminatory behavior, how to respond when they witnessed it, and how to report concerns without fear of retaliation. The bank also established a new customer complaint system that allowed people to report discrimination directly to corporate headquarters rather than having to go through local branch management. This change was particularly important because it prevented situations where discriminatory managers could suppress complaints about their own behavior or retaliate against employees who tried to report misconduct. Maria had worked closely with Dr. Rodriguez and Thomas Wright to develop these new policies and procedures. She had shared her business expertise and her personal experience as a discrimination victim to help create training materials and complaint procedures that would be effective in preventing future incidents. Maria felt proud that her painful experience had been transformed into positive change that would benefit other customers and employees. The reforms had already begun to show positive results. Customer satisfaction scores at all bank branches had improved significantly, particularly among minority customers who reported feeling more welcomed and respected during their banking visits. Employee morale had also improved as staff members felt more confident about speaking up when they witnessed inappropriate behavior or discrimination. The bank had also reached out to the customers who had previously been mistreated by Robert Stevens to apologize for their experiences and to offer compensation for the humiliation and inconvenience they had suffered. 2 of those customers had returned to the bank and were satisfied with the changes that had been implemented. The third customer chose to remain with his new bank, but expressed appreciation for the bank's efforts to address the problems. Maria's charity event had been a tremendous success despite the stressful circumstances surrounding her bank visit that day. The $20,000 she had withdrawn had helped provide school supplies, uniforms, and emergency assistance to over 300 children from low-income families in Chicago. Many of those children had written thank you letters to Maria, expressing their gratitude for her support and sharing their dreams for the future. The story of Maria's experience at the bank had spread throughout the Chicago business community, inspiring other leaders to examine their own organizations for signs of discrimination or unfair treatment. Several other companies had contacted Maria to ask for advice about implementing diversity and inclusion programs, and she had become a sought-after speaker at conferences and business events focused on creating more inclusive workplaces. Maria had also received hundreds of letters and emails from other people who had experienced similar discrimination in various settings. These messages came from customers who had been mistreated at restaurants, retail stores, hotels, and other businesses because of their race, ethnicity, or appearance. Many of these people thanked Maria for her courage in speaking up and said that her example had inspired them to report their own experiences of discrimination. 6 months after the incident, Maria received particularly meaningful recognition when the Chicago Urban League honored her with their Community Leadership Award. The award recognized her role in creating positive change at First National Bank and her ongoing efforts to promote equality and inclusion in the business community. During her acceptance speech, Maria emphasized that fighting discrimination was everyone's responsibility and that silence in the face of injustice only allowed harmful behavior to continue. Robert Stevens had struggled to find new employment after his termination from First National Bank. Word of his discriminatory behavior had spread within the banking industry, making it difficult for him to secure another management position. Maria had heard through mutual contacts that Robert had eventually found work at a small credit union in a different city, hopefully having learned from his mistakes and committed to treating all customers with respect. The most rewarding outcome of the entire experience for Maria was the impact it had on young people in her community. Several high school and college students had reached out to her, saying that her story had inspired them to pursue careers in business and finance despite facing discrimination and obstacles in their own lives. Maria had established a scholarship program at her alma mater to support minority students studying business and entrepreneurship. Maria continued to serve on the board of First National Bank, where she had become the chair of the newly created Diversity and Inclusion Committee. In this role, she worked with bank leadership to monitor the effectiveness of their anti-discrimination policies and to identify new opportunities for promoting equality and inclusion. The bank's reputation had actually improved following the incident, as customers and community leaders praised their decisive response to discrimination and their commitment to meaningful change. 1 year after the incident, Maria reflected on how a simple banking visit had transformed into a powerful lesson about the importance of standing up for what is right. She realized that her position as a successful CEO and board member had given her unique power to create change, but she also knew that ordinary people could make a difference by refusing to accept discrimination and by supporting others who faced unfair treatment. The experience had also strengthened Maria's commitment to using her success and influence to help others. She had expanded her mentorship programs for young entrepreneurs and had increased her charitable giving to organizations that fought discrimination and promoted equality. Maria understood that her financial success came with a responsibility to create opportunities for others and to work toward a more just and inclusive society. As Maria looked back on the entire experience, she felt grateful that something positive had emerged from such a painful and humiliating incident. Her confrontation with discrimination had not only resulted in justice for herself, but had also created lasting change that would benefit countless other customers and employees. Maria had learned that sometimes the most important battles are fought in the most unexpected places, and that standing up for dignity and respect can have far-reaching consequences that extend well beyond any single incident.